Welcome to Study Session 7, Indigenous Knowledge and Development Process. Introduction. Indigenous Knowledge (IK) is an inalienable, inseparable component of the lives of the people in the rural community because their livelihood and survival depend almost entirely on this knowledge. Therefore, within the rural community, IK is of particular relevance to sectors such as agriculture, animal husbandry, natural resources, and primary healthcare. But unfortunately, indigenous knowledge is not yet fully utilized in the development process in African rural communities. In this study, therefore, you will learn the relevance of indigenous knowledge, interaction between indigenous knowledge and the development process, indigenous education, and the categories of knowledge. Learning outcomes. At the end of this study, you should be able to 1. Explain the relevance of indigenous knowledge. 2. Discuss the interaction between indigenous knowledge and the development process. 3. Define indigenous education. 4. Highlight the categories of knowledge. Relevance of IK to the development process. Indigenous knowledge is part of the life of the rural poor. Their livelihood depends almost entirely on specific skills and knowledge essential for their survival. Accordingly, for the development process, IK is of particular relevance to the following sectors and strategies: agriculture, animal husbandry and ethnic veterinary medicine, use and management of natural resources, primary health care, preventive medicine and psychological care, saving and lending, community development, poverty alleviation. Indigenous knowledge is not yet fully utilized in the development process. Conventional approaches imply that development processes always require technology transfer from locations that are perceived as more advanced. This has led to overlooking the potential in local experiences and practices. IK is relevant on 3 levels for the development process. It is obviously most important for the local community in which the bearers of such knowledge live and produce. Development agents, community-based organizations, CBOs, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, governments, donors, local leaders, and private sector initiatives need to recognize it, value it, and appreciate it in their interaction with local communities. Lastly, IK forms part of the global knowledge. In this context, it has a value and relevance in itself. IK can be preserved, transferred, or adopted and adapted elsewhere. Interaction between IK and the development process. The development process interacts with IK. When designing or implementing development programs or projects, 3 scenarios can be observed. The development strategy either relies entirely or substantially on IK, overrides IK, or incorporates IK. Planners and implementers need to decide which path to follow. Rational conclusions are based on determining whether IK would contribute to solve existing problems and achieving the intended objectives. In most cases, a careful amalgamation of indigenous and foreign knowledge will be most promising, leaving the choice, the rate, and the degree of adoption and adaptation to the clients. Foreign knowledge does not necessarily mean modern technology. It includes also indigenous practices developed and applied under similar conditions elsewhere. These techniques are then likely to be adopted faster and applied more successfully. To ensure such a transfer, a sound understanding of IK is needed. Indigenous education. Indigenous education specifically focuses on teaching indigenous knowledge, models, methods, and content within formal or non-formal educational systems. The growing recognition and use of indigenous education methods can be a response to the erosion and loss of indigenous knowledge through the process of colonialism, globalization, and modernity. Indigenous communities are able to reclaim and revalue their languages and traditions, and in so doing improve the educational success of indigenous students, thus ensuring their survival as a culture. Increasingly, there has been a global shift toward recognizing and understanding indigenous models of education as a viable and legitimate form of education. There are many different educational systems throughout the world, and some are more predominant and widely accepted. However, members of indigenous communities celebrate diversity in learning and see this global support for teaching traditional forms of knowledge as a success. Indigenous ways of knowing, learning, instructing, teaching, and training have been viewed by many postmodern scholars as important for ensuring that students and teachers, whether indigenous or non-indigenous, are able to benefit from education in a culturally sensitive manner that draws upon, utilizes, promotes, and enhances awareness of indigenous traditions beyond the standard Western curriculum of reading, writing, and arithmetic. Who are indigenous people? IP. The concept of IK is strongly linked to indigenous people. IP. We, that is IP, are people, communities, and nations who claim a historical continuity and cultural affinity with the pre-invasion and pre-colonial societies which developed on our original territories, and therefore consider ourselves distinct from societies of the majority cultures, and have contested our cultural sovereignty and right to self-determination. We have historically formed and still currently form the minority, non-dominant sectors within majority cultural societies. We intend to continue preserving, reviving, and enhancing the efficacy, cohesion, and uniqueness of our traditional social values and customary ties, alongside making a conscious effort to transmit this knowledge to future generations. Categories of knowledge. Knowledge is a term with many meanings depending on context, but it is, as a rule, closely related to such concepts as meaning, information, instruction, communication, representation, learning, and mental stimulus. A common definition of knowledge is that it consists of justified true belief. Knowledge is the awareness and understanding of facts, truths, or information gained in the form of experience or learning. Knowledge is an appreciation of the possession of interconnected details which in isolation are of lesser value. Knowledge refers to what one knows and understands. Knowledge is sometimes categorized as tacit knowledge, explicit knowledge, structured knowledge, unstructured knowledge. What we know is explicit knowledge. Implicit knowledge is knowledge that is unstructured and understood but not clearly expressed. If the knowledge is organized and easy to share, then it is called structured knowledge. To convert implicit knowledge into explicit knowledge, it must be extracted and formatted. Through experience, observation, and inference, individuals and cultures gain knowledge. The spread of this knowledge is examined by diffusion. Diffusion and innovation theory explores the factors that lead people to become aware, try, and adopt new ideas and practices. As the awareness of the importance of knowledge in the development process grows, the next logical step would be for the country's authorities to begin elaborating specific policies in support of acquiring, absorbing, and communicating knowledge, with particular attention to indigenous knowledge. Visit any primary healthcare center in your neighborhood to understand the relevance of IK to the sector. Summary of study session. In this study session, you have learned that 1. Indigenous knowledge is part of the life of the rural poor. Thus, livelihood depends almost entirely on specific skills and knowledge essential for their survival. 2. IK is relevant on 3 levels for the development process. 3. The development process interacts with IK. 4. Indigenous education specifically focuses on teaching indigenous knowledge, models, methods, and content within formal or non-formal educational systems. 4. Indigenous knowledge IK is of particular relevance to agriculture, animal husbandry, natural resources, primary healthcare, saving and lending, community development, and poverty alleviation. 5. There is interaction between IK and the development process in African rural communities. 6. Knowledge is a term with many meanings depending on context, but it is as a rule closely related to such concepts as meaning, information, instruction, communication, representation, learning, and mental stimulus. This is the end of study session 7. Thank you.